That old biker was not lost, Ine. He came to repay my father's debt.
The alarm on Jesse Carver's phone went off at 5:15 every morning, and every morning he was already awake. He lay still for exactly 30 seconds, staring at the water stain on the ceiling above his bed, the one shaped like a crooked hand that had been there since he was 7 years old, and a pipe burst in the wall during a February ice storm. His father had patched the pipe that same night. He never got around to fixing the ceiling. Jesse had stopped noticing the stain years ago. Now in the weeks since the foreclosure notice arrived, he noticed it every single morning. He pulled himself out of bed at 5:16, the same gray thermal shirt he had slept in, the same work jeans from the night before draped over the chair, and he walked barefoot down the hall to the kitchen. The linoleum was cold. It was always cold this time of year in Harlem Bluff, Kentucky, where October came in hard off the ridgeline and stayed until it felt like it had always been there. May Carver was still asleep. She slept light and late ever since Thomas died, the way people sleep when they are tired in a way that rest cannot fix. Jesse moved through the kitchen without turning on the overhead light. He filled the coffee pot, set it to brew on the timer, the way he always did, and then he walked through the side door into the garage. Carver and Son Auto Repair. The sign out front was hand-lettered by his grandfather in 1989, the summer before Jesse's father Thomas was born. The wood had gone soft at the edges. The paint was lifting in long, thin strips. Jesse had meant to repaint it every spring for 3 years running, and every spring, something else came first. Now it did not seem worth repainting. In 28 days, the sign would belong to someone else. He stood in the center of the garage bay and breathed in motor oil and cold concrete and the faint sweetness of the solvent his father had used on everything, a smell that Jesse could not name and could not find anywhere except here. 6 bays total, only 4 operational. His father had built the last 2 himself the summer Jesse was 9, the summer Thomas believed the business was going to grow. Jesse remembered handing his father tools through that whole August, sweating in the dust, learning the names of things he could not yet use. He walked to the workbench along the back wall. Thomas Carver's workbench. Jesse had not moved a single item on it in 6 years. The chipped blue coffee mug still holding 2 petrified rings of old coffee at the bottom. The half-rebuilt carburetor clamped in the vise, exactly where Thomas had left it the morning he drove to the Whitfield paper mill and did not come home. A worn leather work glove, one glove, the left hand, the right one, lost somewhere years before Thomas died, kept anyway because Thomas never threw away anything he had used. And propped against the wall in the far corner of the bench, its spine soft and its pages yellowed at the edges, an old Iron Road Custom Cycles parts catalog from the mid-90s. Jesse's father had kept it on that bench for as long as Jesse could remember. Jesse picked up a clean rag and wiped the surface of the bench the way he did every morning, slow and careful, working around each object without disturbing it. When he was finished, he set the rag down and looked at his father's name, stenciled in black marker on the side of the toolbox. Thomas Allen Carver. 6 years. 6 years of mornings like this one, and the grief still had a physical weight to it, something Jesse felt in his sternum, like a held breath that never fully released. He was 19 years old and he ran his dead father's garage alone. The coffee was ready when he came back inside. He poured a cup, drank half of it standing at the sink, and then he opened the kitchen drawer where May kept the household bills. He did not need to open it. He knew exactly what was in there. He opened it anyway, the way a man probes a sore tooth with his tongue to confirm the pain is still real. The foreclosure notice was on top, folded once. Jesse had read it so many times the crease was splitting. Harlan County Community Bank, acting on behalf of the new recorded holder of the instrument of debt, Douglas Fitch Properties, LLC, hereby provides notice of acceleration and demand for full payment. Outstanding principal, accrued interest, penalties, and past due taxes totaling $197,412. Payment in full required within 28 days of this notice, or proceedings for foreclosure will commence without further warning. Douglas Fitch. Jesse closed the drawer and finished his coffee. He had known the name his whole life, the way you know the names of landmarks, the way you know the name of a hill or a bend in the river. Douglas Fitch had grown up in Harlem Bluff, moved away at 20, came back at 40, with money he had made in commercial real estate in Lexington and Nashville, and somewhere in Ohio. He wore pressed shirts and leather shoes that were always clean which was a thing you noticed in a town where most men worked with their hands. He sponsored the 4th of July parade and the Little League tournament and 3 pews in the front section of First Methodist. He spoke at Thomas Carver's memorial service. He shook May's hand and told her Thomas was a fine man and that the community would look after her. That was 6 years ago. What Jesse had found out 3 weeks ago when he drove 40 miles to talk to the only lawyer in the county who would see him on short notice was that Douglas Fitch had been buying land along Route 7 for 2 years, quietly, through 3 different LLCs with different names piecing together lots the way a man assembles a puzzle, making sure no single purchase drew enough attention to connect to the others. A strip mall lot here, an empty field there, the old grain co-op building, the defunct auto parts warehouse. When the last piece of the puzzle became clear, the lawyer had spread the map on his desk and gone very quiet. What Fitch was building was not a subdivision or a strip mall. It was a regional distribution hub, the kind of development that required every lot in a half-mile corridor along Route 7 to be under single ownership. Every lot except one. Carver & Son Auto Repair. Fitch had gone to the bank 9 months ago and quietly purchased the Carver mortgage as a distressed asset. When May fell behind on payments after the transmission shop in Corbin started undercutting Jesse's prices, Fitch had his lawyers invoke an acceleration clause buried in the original loan documents, a clause that allowed the holder of the debt to call the full balance due in the event of 2 consecutive missed payments. It was legal. The original bank officer who had written that clause into the loan in 1997 was retired and living in Florida. Nobody had ever expected it to be used. Jesse had asked the lawyer what they could do. The lawyer had looked at the map for a long time. Then he had said, "Not much, son." Back in the kitchen, Jesse slid $40 from the cash envelope he kept in his jacket pocket and tucked it into the inside fold of May's wallet where she kept her grocery money. He had been doing this every morning for 2 years. May had never once mentioned it. That was their agreement, unspoken and total. He went to work. The first customer arrived at 7:40, a 2009 Chevy pickup with a water pump going bad. Jesse had it diagnosed by 8 and finished by 10:15. He charged $65 for labor and the cost of the part at his own margin, which was thinner than it should have been because the man who owned the truck had been bringing his vehicles to Thomas Carver since 1998, and Jesse was not going to be the one who changed that. The second job was a brake job on a minivan, and the third was a check engine light that turned out to be a loose gas cap, which Jesse fixed in 4 minutes and charged nothing for. By noon, he had made $90. He ate a sandwich standing at the workbench, drinking water from a bottle, looking at his father's coffee mug. Underneath his mattress, in a manila envelope he had not opened in 2 weeks, was a letter from the University of Kentucky College of Engineering. Partial scholarship, mechanical engineering. The admissions office had written that his application was among the strongest. They had reviewed that cycle. The scholarship covered 60%. Jesse needed $19,000 to cover the rest of the room and board and fees that the scholarship did not touch. He had been working the night shift at the Sunoco on Route 9 for 11 months, 4 hours a night, 5 nights a week, off the books at $11 an hour. He had saved $4,380. The deadline to accept and submit the enrollment deposit was in 28 days. The same 28 days the foreclosure notice was counting down. He had not told May about the letter. He had not told anyone. His best friend, Darnell Voss, called every Sunday from Louisville, where Darnell was in his second year at Jefferson Community College. The calls always followed the same shape. Darnell would ask how things were going, and Jesse would say fine, and Darnell would ask when Jesse was going to get out of Harlan Bluff, and Jesse would say next year, and Darnell would say, "Man, you said that last year," and Jesse would say, "I know." Then the call would end because they had both run out of things to say that were not the truth, and the truth was too heavy to carry over the phone. What Darnell did not understand was that there was a woman asleep down the hall every night who had lost her son and her income and her savings in the same accident, and who got up every morning and made biscuits and checked on the chickens and asked Jesse how his day was going with a steadiness that cost her something he could not calculate. Jesse was not leaving until the house was safe. That was the whole of it. At 3 in the afternoon, Douglas Fitch's black Escalade pulled into the gravel lot. Jesse was under the Chevy pickup finishing the reinstall of the water pump. He heard the tires on the gravel and knew the sound of that engine. He stayed where he was. Fitch's shoes appeared at the edge of the bay, clean leather, not a speck of dust on them. "Afternoon, Jesse." Jesse rolled out from under the truck and stood up wiping his hands on a shop rag. He did not say anything. Fitch looked around the bay the way a man looks at something he already considers his own. He was 54 years old, thick through the shoulders, hair gone silver at the temples in a way that looked deliberate. He had the easy smile of a man who had never needed to rush anything. "I was hoping to speak with your grandmother. She's not here." Fitch nodded slowly. That was not true, and both of them knew it. May's car was in the side lot. "Well," Fitch said, "I want you to know, I think about your family often. Your daddy was a fine mechanic. This town lost something real when Thomas passed." Jesse looked at the rag in his hands. "I've been thinking about this property." Fitch's voice was mild and conversational, the way a man talks about the weather or a ball game. "I want to make sure May has options. I want to make sure she knows the offer I've made is a genuine one. Good price. Clean close. She wouldn't have to worry about any of this anymore." Jesse looked up. "The offer you made is 60% of what this land is worth." Fitch smiled. "Markets are complicated. I'm trying to be fair to a woman in a difficult situation." Jesse said nothing. Fitch held the smile for another moment, then let it settle into something quieter. He looked around the bay one more time. "Son, I don't want to see this place go the hard way. I genuinely don't. But I need you to understand something. I'm a patient man." He paused, letting the weight of it land. "I don't need her to agree. I just need to wait." He walked back to his Escalade and drove away without hurrying. Jesse stood in the bay doorway and watched the dust settle on the gravel after the tires had gone. His hands were very still. He looked at the hand-lettered sign above the door. The peeling paint, his grandfather's brushwork 40 years old and fading. He went back to work. That night, he took the manila envelope out from under his mattress and sat on the edge of his bed with it in his hands for a long time. He did not open it. He already knew every word inside. He set it back and lay down in the dark with his hands folded on his chest and looked at the crooked hand water stain until his eyes closed. The next 3 days were unremarkable. Work the night shift, sleep. He made $210 in the shop. He added $43 to the cash envelope. He called Darnell on Sunday and said everything was fine. The fourth day, the weather changed. The radio in the bay had been warning about it since Friday. A front pushing up from the Gulf, rotating moisture from a disturbance in the Tennessee Valley. Tornado watch for the Ridge counties. Possible road closures on the interstates south of Lexington. Jesse had heard storm warnings his whole life, and he had learned to watch the sky more than the radio. By 4 in the afternoon, the sky above the tree line had gone the color of old iron. The light, the strange flat yellow that meant the atmosphere was doing something serious. The pine trees along Route 7 were bending in long, slow arcs. The chickens were restless. Jesse rolled the bay doors most of the way down and kept working on a 1997 Silverado that needed a new alternator. At 4:40, he heard the engine. Not a car engine, a motorcycle somewhere up the road running rough in a way that a mechanic hears differently than other people hear it. A missing fire, irregular and worsening, the kind of sound that starts as an inconvenience and ends as a roadside breakdown. Jesse stepped to the bay door and looked out. The figure appeared through the first sheets of rain. An old man in a leather-cut gray-bearded, pushing a black motorcycle along the shoulder of Route 7, with one hand on the handlebar and one hand pressed against his right hip like he was holding himself together. The bike was a Harley, a panhead, from the looks of it, black with chrome fittings that caught what little light was left in the sky. It was a machine from another era, heavy and beautiful and completely dead. Jesse jogged out through the rain. He got to the man just as the first serious thunderclap came down, the kind that you feel in your back teeth. The old man looked up, blue eyes waterlogged, exhausted, deep creases in his face from years of road and weather. A leather vest covered in patches that Jesse could not read in the rain. He was maybe 65, maybe older. He was limping badly on the right leg. "Let me help you, sir." The man looked at him for a moment, then nodded. They rolled the panhead into the bay together, Jesse taking most of the weight. The rain turned into a wall behind them as they got the kickstand down. The old man leaned against the workbench and caught his breath, his chest moving hard. His hands were shaking, not from cold. May appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. She took in the scene the way women like May take in scenes quickly and completely. The leather, the patches, the road-worn face. Her shoulders went tight. "Mama," Jesse kept his voice easy. "It's all right." The old man straightened up, removed his soaked hat, and held it in both hands with a care that was almost ceremonial. His voice was rough but measured. "Ma'am, my name is Grant. I am sorry to come to your door like this. I would not have if I had any other option." May looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her posture, something small and fundamental. Manners were a language May Carver had spoken her entire life, and this man was speaking it back to her. "Come in out of that rain, Mr. Grant. I have coffee on. Grant Holden." That was what he said when Jesse asked for a full name, once they had the man seated on the old stool in the corner of the bay with a mug of May's coffee warming both his hands. Grant Holden. He offered nothing else with the name, and Jesse did not ask. You learned early in a garage that men told you what you needed to know and kept the rest. He had been riding 3 days out of Chattanooga. The Panhead started running hot near the Tennessee border, missing fire south of Corbin. He had stopped at the Chain Auto Center 6 miles down Route 7. The kid behind the counter had looked at the motorcycle for about 4 seconds before telling him they did not service vintage and suggesting he try the next county. So Grant had pushed the bike in the rain until he found a sign that said Carver and Son. Jesse crouched by the engine. He took his time working through the systems with the methodical patience his father had taught him, checking in the right order, not skipping steps. Grant watched from the stool without speaking. Only his eyes moved. After 12 minutes, Jesse stood up. "I want to be straight with you, sir." Jesse set his hands on his hips. "The head gasket is blown. Ignition coil is dead. There is a hairline crack in the cylinder sleeve right side. And the carburetor is gummed up so bad I can smell it from 2 feet away." Grant's face did not change, but something behind his eyes went very still. "Can you fix it?" It was not quite a question. It was the kind of statement a man makes when he has run out of alternatives and is laying it on the table. Jesse looked at the bike. "The parts you need do not exist in this county. Not for a 52 Panhead. Every shop in 40 miles closes at 5. Roads are going to be shut inside the hour. Even if I ordered what I needed 3 days minimum." Grant set the coffee mug on the bench. His jaw was working. He looked at the floor, then at the motorcycle, then at something that was not in the room. When he spoke, his voice was lower than it had been. "Son, I have to be in Bowling Green, Kentucky by sunrise. 212 miles north." He paused. "My brother Eddie passed 11 months ago. Before he went, we made a promise to each other. Whoever went first, the other one rides to the spot on the first anniversary. Sunrise. 2 minutes of silence. Then back on the road." He swallowed. "A stretch of highway where we used to ride as young men. Eddie held up his end for 9 anniversaries. I have never once missed mine." The rain was coming down so hard now it was drumming the tin roof like a continuous percussion that made everything else slightly harder to hear. Jesse looked at the bike. He looked at the old man's shaking hands. He looked at the floor. Then he walked to his father's workbench and crouched down, pulling a steel toolbox from the lower shelf, and behind it a cardboard box he had not opened in over a year. Scrap parts, things his father had refused to throw away. Pieces that most mechanics would have called worthless, including one section of a 1994 Dodge Dakota engine block that Thomas Carver had kept because, as he once told Jesse, anything a man made, another man can make again. Jesse lifted the block onto the lathe. He looked back at Grant Holden. "You get some more coffee from my grandmother, sir, and then you sit down. It's going to be a long night." What happened in the next 11 hours, Jesse would later struggle to describe, not because he lacked the words, but because the experience did not live entirely in language. It lived in the specific weight of a hand tool and the angle of a cut and the smell of copper annealed over a propane flame. It lived in the quality of silence between two people when one of them is watching the other do something real. The power went out at 6:47. Jesse lit the kerosene lantern from the wall hook and clamped his father's battery work light to the engine stand, the same dented light Thomas had used every night for 15 years. The bay went gold and warm. Outside, the storm was taking trees apart. He turned the Dakota block on the lathe by hand, slow and precise feeling, for the tolerance against the panhead specs by touch, adjusting turning again. The sleeve had to be right, or the whole engine would destroy itself inside 50 miles. There was no margin and there was no shortcut, and Jesse did not look for one. May brought food at 8:30, set a plate near Grant's elbow, and retreated without a word. Grant ate without taking his eyes off Jesse. At 9, while Jesse was bench testing the ignition coil he had pulled from an old riding mower he had been cannibalizing for parts since summer, Grant spoke from the corner. "How old are you, son?" 19. "How long have you been running this shop?" 6 years, since my dad died." Silence. "Where did you learn to work like that?" Jesse did not look up from the multimeter. He watched the needle jump clean and set the coil on the shelf. "Thomas, my father, best mechanic in this county." He paused. "Probably 3 counties." Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his vest and pulled out a small, worn notebook and wrote something in it slowly in the careful way a man writes when he means to remember. Jesse did not ask what he wrote. At 11:20, Jesse cut the copperhead gasket by hand from a flat sheet he had been saving for a metalwork project he had never gotten around to starting. He scored it with a scribe, cut it with snips, annealed it with the propane torch until it glowed cherry red, quenched it in a bucket of cold water, and filed the edges by feel in the lamplight. It took 40 minutes. His hands were black with grease, and his back ached from the crouch, and his eyes burned from the close work in the low light. Grant had not moved from the stool. May appeared once more at midnight, stood in the doorway with her arms folded, watching Jesse work for a long moment before going back inside. She did not say anything, but her presence was its own form of words. At 12:50, Jesse began reassembly. He laid the new gasket in with the precision of a man who knows that care at this stage is the difference between a machine that lives and a machine that dies on the highway at 70 miles an hour. Head bolts torqued in cross pattern, 3 passes. Coil connected leads checked. Carburetor cleaned in a coffee can of gasoline and reinstalled. At 1:47, he stood back. His arms were trembling from the sustained work. His shirt was soaked through. The lantern was burning low. "You want to do the honor, sir?" Grant stood up from the stool slowly, the way men move when their body has been still too long. He limped to the motorcycle and sat down in the saddle, settling his weight, getting his footing. He put both hands on the bars. He closed his eyes for a moment, just one moment, the way a man does before something that matters. Then he hit the starter. Click. Nothing. Grant's jaw went tight. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Jesse leaned in, checked the spark gap with a wire gauge, made a small adjustment. One more time. Grant hit it again. A cough, a stutter, then silence. The rain outside had eased to a steady, hard pour. The lantern flame wavered. Jesse's hands were very still. He reached down to the carburetor and turned the mixture screw by exactly 1/4 turn. "One more time, sir." Grant hit the starter for the 3rd time. The panhead came alive. Not tentatively, not apologetically. It came alive the way a machine comes alive when it has been understood, a deep, authoritative thunder that filled the bay and vibrated in the floor and the walls and in Jesse's chest. May appeared instantly in the doorway, coffee pot in hand, eyes wide. Grant bowed his head over the handlebars. His shoulders shook once, twice, 3 times. He made no sound, but the tears came freely dropping onto the polished gas tank, catching the lamplight. Jesse stepped back and gave the man his moment. At 2:14, Jesse set his tools down for the last time and wiped his hands clean. "She will hold the 200 miles, sir. Probably more than that. You will want a proper sleeve machined in within the next few thousand." Grant looked up. His eyes were red. His voice, when it came, was rough in a different way than it had been before, roughened, not by road or weather, but by something interior. "Son." He stopped, cleared his throat. "What you did here tonight." He looked at the engine, then at Jesse, then at the floor. "That is not mechanic work." He shook his head slowly. "That is something else entirely." Jesse looked at the floor. "He was not good at being praised. It was what my father taught me, sir. Nothing more than that." Grant stared at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Your father was a good man, Jesse Carver." Jesse kept his eyes on the floor. The words went somewhere deep and stayed there. Grant reached into his vest and pulled out a roll of cash. He counted out $500 in $100 bills and held them out across the bench. Jesse shook his head. $20 for the labor. The scrap was just sitting in the pile. Grant let out a short sound that was almost a laugh. $20. I would have paid $2,000 and called it a bargain. Jesse did not move. $20 and the coffee my grandmother made you. That is what is honest, sir. Grant held the money for another moment, looking at Jesse with an expression that Jesse could not fully read. Then he set all but one bill back in his vest. He laid the 20 on the bench. He reached up to his leather cut and unpinned something from the chest panel, a small, worn pin, a horseshoe over an anvil with 2 letters beneath it. He set it on the bench next to the 20. He pulled out a folded card, no name printed on it, just the same horseshoe emblem and a phone number in handwriting. He set it beside the pin. "You keep those." He looked at Jesse steadily. "Anything you need, you call that number, you say your name, and you wait. You hear me?" "Yes, sir." Grant swung his leg over the saddle. The engine was still running, a steady, low idle that filled the bay with its presence. He looked at Jesse one more time. "What you did tonight will not be forgotten, son." The headlight came on. Grant rolled the panhead out into the pre-dawn dark, the taillight disappearing up Route 7 into what remained of the rain. Jesse and May stood in the bay doorway, watching the sound of the engine fade north. May put her hand on her grandson's shoulder. "That man carries something heavy." Jesse did not answer. He was still watching the dark road. "Baby." Her voice was quiet. "Your daddy would be proud tonight." Jesse nodded. He looked at the 20 on the bench and the horseshoe pin beside it in the folded card. He walked to the workbench to clean up. That was when his foot caught on something soft under the lower shelf pushed against the wall. He crouched down. A leather saddlebag, dark brown, old heavy. The buckle was worn smooth from years of use. Grant Holden had forgotten it. Jesse lifted it onto the workbench and opened the buckle. Inside, a folded road map, bowling green circled in red, a small Bible, its spine cracked from handling, and a sheet of paper folded once which turned out to be a torn page from a trade industry newspaper. Jesse unfolded it carefully. The page was from a publication called Road and Iron, dated 7 years ago. There was a photograph of 2 men at an industry event, arms around each other, smiling for the camera. Jesse recognized Grant immediately, a younger, darker-haired, but the same eyes and the same build. The other man he did not recognize. But what held him was not the photograph. It was the headline above it. Iron Road Custom Cycles marks 20 years, founder Grant Holden, on legacy, brotherhood, and what comes next. Jesse set the paper down on the bench. Iron Road Custom Cycles. He looked at his father's catalog propped against the wall in the corner of the bench where it had lived for as long as Jesse could remember. The logo on the spine, small and faded. A horseshoe over an anvil. He picked up the catalog with hands that were not entirely steady. He turned to the inside front cover. There, in handwriting he had never noticed before, or had noticed and never understood, in faded blue ink in the upper right corner, 3 words and 2 initials. Thomas. "Stay safe, GH." Jesse stood in the lamplight of his father's garage at 2:30 in the morning and read those 5 words until they stopped making the room tilt under his feet. He looked at the pin on the bench, the horseshoe and the anvil. The same emblem as the catalog cover. The same initials. He looked at the road outside, empty, now the rain easing to a mist, the sound of that engine long gone north. He stood there for a long time. Then he turned and walked to the kitchen doorway. May was standing at the counter, both hands around her coffee mug, watching him with the careful attention of a woman who has learned to read her family's silences. He held up the catalog. The inscription faced her. "Mama." His voice came out quiet. "I do not think that was just some old biker who needed his engine fixed." May looked at the inscription. Then she looked at Jesse. She sat down slowly in the kitchen chair, the way people sit when their legs have made a decision before their mind has caught up. Outside, the last of the storm moved off to the north. The pine trees along Route 7 dripped in the stillness. Somewhere down the road, a rooster tried the dark and found it still too early. 28 days left on a clock that was not going to stop. And somewhere up that dark road, 212 miles north, a man on a Harley panhead was keeping a promise to a dead man. Jesse did not sleep. He lay on his back in the dark with the catalog on the mattress beside him, its cover facing up the horseshoe and anvil logo, catching the thin gray light that came through the curtain before dawn. He had read the inscription 11 times. Thomas, stay safe, GH. 5 words in faded blue ink that had been sitting on his father's workbench for 7 years, and that he had dusted around every Sunday morning without ever once looking closely enough to read them. He thought about that, about all the things that are right in front of you that you do not see because you have decided you already know what they are. At 5:15, his phone went off. He was already dressed. May was in the kitchen when he came down the hall. She had the catalog open on the table in front of her, her reading glasses on, turning the pages slowly. She did not look up when Jesse came in. He poured his coffee and sat down across from her. She turned another page. Then she closed the catalog and took her glasses off and folded them on the table. She looked at her grandson. "Baby," she said, "do not build a house on a foundation you are not sure of yet." Jesse wrapped both hands around his mug. He looked at the inscription on the inside cover facing up between them. "I am not building anything, Mama. I am just looking at what is there." May looked at the inscription for a long moment. Then she looked out the kitchen window at the pine trees along the fence line dripping from the night's rain, the sky behind them the pale gray of early morning. When she spoke, her voice was careful in the way it got when she was managing something inside herself. "Your daddy helped a lot of people in his life." She paused. Most of them he never saw again. That was fine with him. That was the point. She looked back at Jesse. "Do not let wanting something turn a coincidence into a miracle." "Yes, ma'am." She got up and started the biscuits. Jesse finished his coffee and went to work. The morning was slow. A tire rotation on a Jeep Cherokee, an oil change on a farm truck that belonged to an elderly man named Earl Voss, who had been coming to Carver and Son since Thomas was alive, and who paid in cash and always left a $5 tip that he slid across the counter without making eye contact, the way men of his generation expressed affection without naming it. Jesse thanked him and watched him drive away and stood in the bay door for a moment looking at the road. At noon, he went inside and opened his laptop on the kitchen table. He typed Iron Road Custom Cycles into the search bar. The results loaded. He read for 40 minutes. Iron Road Custom Cycles, founded 1981 in Bowling Green, Kentucky, grew from a two-man custom build shop into the largest independent American motorcycle manufacturer outside of Milwaukee. Annual revenue in the nine-figure range. Distributed through 42 states. Known particularly for restoration work on vintage American iron, a specialty that the founder had insisted on maintaining even as the commercial side of the business expanded. Founder and chairman Grant R. Holden. Jesse sat back in his chair. He looked at the catalog on the table. He looked at the laptop screen. He looked at the back door of the kitchen, beyond which was the garage, beyond which was his father's workbench, with the coffee mug and the carburetor, and the empty space where the catalog usually sat. He thought about Grant Holden sitting on that stool in the corner for 11 hours, not complaining, not rushing him, watching every movement with those blue eyes that took in more than they gave back, writing in that notebook. He thought about the look on Grant's face when Jesse pushed the $500 away. He closed the laptop. He did not tell May what he had found. She had asked him not to build on uncertain ground, and he was going to honor that until he understood what the ground actually was. He went back to work. Douglas Fitch came back on Friday. Jesse was in the back bay working on a brake caliper rebuild when he heard the Escalade pull into the lot. He heard two doors this time, not one. He wiped his hands and came around to the front. Fitch was standing in the bay entrance with a younger man Jesse did not recognize. A man in a sport coat carrying a leather portfolio, the kind that lawyers carry when they are there to show you something rather than discuss it. Jesse stopped in the middle of the bay. "Afternoon, Jesse." Fitch's voice was as easy as it always was. He gestured to the man beside him. "This is Mr. Aldridge. He handles my property matters." The man named Aldridge opened the portfolio without being asked. He produced a single document, 2 pages, and held it out toward Jesse. Jesse did not take it. Aldridge kept holding it. "This is a notice of intent to accelerate the default proceedings," he said. "Mr. Fitch, as the recorded holder of the debt instrument, is exercising his right under Section 14 of the original mortgage agreement to proceed to foreclosure without further waiting period, given the property's failure to meet the maintenance standards specified in the collateral agreement." Jesse looked at Fitch. Maintenance standards. Fitch's expression was patient and slightly sorrowful, the look of a man who is doing something regrettable but necessary. He glanced at the garage roof. Storm did some damage up there. Couple of the fascia panels. He paused. The collateral agreement specifies that the mortgage property must be maintained in a condition that does not diminish its appraised value. He spread his hands. "I am just doing what the contract requires." Jesse kept his voice level. "That storm was 4 days ago." Fitch nodded. "I know. And I am sorry the timing is what it is." He waited a moment. This could all be resolved very simply. You know what I am prepared to offer. Fair price, clean clothes. No more of this for your grandmother. Jesse looked at the document Aldrich was still holding out. 28 days becomes what under this filing, he said. Aldrich cleared his throat. 72 hours. The number landed in the bay like something thrown. Jesse stood very still. Fitch looked at him with an expression that was almost kind. Son, I have been in this business for 20 years. I know what it looks like when a family has done everything they can and it is not enough. He let that sit for a moment. There is no shame in it. Thomas would have wanted May taken care of. Jesse looked at the man for a long time without speaking. He was aware of his own breathing. He was aware of the smell of the shop, the oil and solvent, and his father's presence that lived in the air of this place. He was aware of the 20 on the bench and the horseshoe pin and the folded card with the phone number. He kept his hands still at his sides. You can leave that document on the bench or you can take it with you, Jesse said. Either way, I would like you to leave my property now. Fitch held his gaze for another moment. Then he nodded once with the patience of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to get what he wanted. He gestured to Aldrich, who set the document on the workbench and closed his portfolio. They walked back to the Escalade. Jesse stood in the bay doorway and watched them go. 72 hours. He had not heard May come to the kitchen doorway, but when he turned, she was there, both hands pressed flat against the doorframe, her face carrying an expression he had not seen on her since the morning the paper mill called. Jesse, what is that man doing? He looked at his grandmother. He tried to find the words that would be honest without being crushing. He bought our loan from the bank, Mama. He is our lender now. He can call it due whenever he wants. May stood very still, her hands pressed harder against the doorframe. Can he do that? Is that legal? Jesse looked at the floor. Yes, ma'am. She was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on Route 7 without slowing. Jesse picked up the document from the bench and read it through. All 2 pages. He read it twice. He set it back down. He picked up the folded card with the phone number. He stood there holding it for a full minute. Then he set it down again and went to the kitchen to start dinner. That night, after May went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his phone in front of him and the folded card beside it and the catalog open to the inscription. He sat there for 45 minutes. At 10:50, he picked up his phone and called Darnell. Darnell answered on the second ring. Talk to me, Jesse said. There was a pause on Darnell's end, the pause of a man recalibrating from whatever he had been doing to what he was hearing in his friend's voice. What happened? Jesse told him. The document. The 72 hours, Fitch standing in the bay with his portfolio and his patient face and his mention of Thomas. When Jesse finished, there was a long silence. Man, Darnell said. Then he said it again, the way men say something twice when once is not enough to hold the weight of it. I need a lawyer, Jesse said. I need somebody who is not scared of Fitch. Another silence. Then Darnell said, slow and careful, Jesse. My cousin Marcus, he is paralegal at a firm in Louisville. I can call him tonight, but I need to tell you something first. He paused. I heard something last week. I did not call because I did not know if it was real. He stopped. Tell me. Fitch went to 2 lawyers in Harlem Bluff last month. Marcus heard it through somebody who knows somebody. Both of them turned down whatever he offered. They said no to representing you if you came in. He let that land. Jesse, that man is not just waiting. He is clearing the board. Jesse stared at the table. He is making sure I have nowhere to go, Jesse said. That is what it looks like. Jesse looked at the folded card. Call Marcus, he said. Tonight if you can. I will. Darnell's voice shifted, getting quieter. Jesse, you doing all right? Jesse looked at his father's catalog, the inscription, the horseshoe on the cover. I do not know yet, he said, but I am still here. He hung up and sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after that. The next morning was Saturday. Jesse was in the bay by 6. He worked through the morning on a clutch replacement on a mid-90s pickup that belonged to a farmer from the next ridge over. He worked with the careful, consuming focus that had always been his best defense against things he could not solve with his hands. When his mind was in an engine, it could not be in the foreclosure notice or the 72-hour clock or Douglas Fitch's clean leather shoes. At 10:30, May came into the bay. She was holding the manila envelope from under his mattress. Jesse stayed very still. May looked at the envelope. She did not look angry. She looked the way she looked sometimes when she was carrying something that was bigger than anger and quieter than grief. She looked at Jesse. When did this come? 8 months ago. She unfolded the letter and read it. She had obviously already read it, but she read it again slowly, standing in the bay with the autumn light coming through the open door. When she finished, she folded it back along its creases and put it in the envelope and set the envelope on the bench. She did not speak for a moment. The clutch truck ticked as it cooled. "Baby," she said. Her voice was steady and low. "Why did you not tell me?" Jesse looked at the floor. "Because it did not matter if we lost the house. I was not going anywhere until you were safe." May stood there with her hands folded in front of her. She was 68 years old, and she had buried her husband and her son and kept this household standing through all of it. And when she looked at Jesse, the full weight of all that was visible in her face. "Do you understand?" She said, "that your father worked himself to the bone so that you would have choices he did not have?" Jesse's throat tightened. "And you have been hiding this under your mattress for 8 months. She paused, going to work at a gas station at night for $11 an hour, slipping $40 into my wallet every morning like I do not know it is there. She stopped, pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Jesse, I have been watching you become your father, and I have been so proud of you and so afraid for you at the same time." Jesse looked at his hands. "You have to go," May said. Her voice was quiet and final. "That is not me giving up. That is me telling you that this is what Thomas wanted. That is what I want." She picked up the envelope and held it out to him. "You have to go." Jesse took the envelope. He could not look at her face. "I am not going anywhere in the 72 hours, he said. "Not with this hanging over us." May held his gaze. "Then what are you going to do?" Jesse looked at the folded card on the bench. He had not touched it since the night before. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, looking at the handwritten number, the small horseshoe emblem printed in the corner. "I do not know yet," he said, "but I might know somebody." May looked at the card for a long moment. Then she looked at her grandson with an expression that held both the warning she had given him on Friday morning about building on uncertain ground and something older than the warning, something that was not hope exactly, but was the door to hope standing slightly open. "Be careful, baby," she said, and she went back inside. Jesse stood alone in the bay holding the card. He set it down. He picked up his tools and finished the clutch job. He drove the truck around the block to test the action, and it was clean and solid and good. He brought it back and wrote up the invoice and called the farmer and went into the kitchen and washed his hands. Then he sat at the kitchen table and picked up his phone. He dialed the number on the card. It rang 4 times. He was preparing himself to leave a message when the call connected. No greeting, just open air and the faint background sound of machinery. Jesse waited a beat. "Jesse Carver," he said. "From Harlan Bluff." Silence on the line. 3-4 seconds of it. Then a voice, not Grant's, deeper and slower, a voice built for economy. "Hold." Jesse held. He heard footsteps. A door. More machinery in the background, and then less of it, a door closing, the ambient sound changing. Then Grant Holden's voice. "Jesse?" "Yes, sir." A pause. "You all right, son?" Jesse looked at the wall. He thought about how to say it and decided that plain was the only honest way. "A man named Douglas Fitch bought our loan from the bank," he said. "He is the one who has been trying to get this property. He filed a 72-hour notice yesterday afternoon." Silence. "I am not calling to ask for anything," Jesse said. "I just want you to know that I found out who you are. And I want you to know that I did not work on your bike because of who you are. And the $20 was the right price." He stopped. "That is all I wanted to say." The silence on the other end of the line was not empty. Jesse had spent enough time with working men to know the difference between a silence that is nothing and a silence that is something being decided. Grant spoke. "Where is the notice now?" "On my workbench." "What is the property address?" Jesse told him. Another silence. Then Jesse, "Do not sign anything. Do not talk to Fitch again until you hear from me." He paused. "You have my word I will call you back before tonight." Jesse looked at the card in his hand. "With all respect, sir, I do not need anything fixed for me. I just wanted you to know the situation." "Son," Grant's voice was quiet, and there was something in it that was not pity and was not charity. and that Jesse would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Sometimes a debt is not about the person who owes it being able to pay it back. Sometimes it is just about the debt being real. He paused. Let me make a call. The line went quiet. Jesse set his phone on the table. He sat there for a while. Then he got up and went back to work because it was the only thing he knew how to do with his hands, when his mind was somewhere it could not fully go. Darnell called at 4 o'clock. Marcus from the Louisville firm had looked at the document Jesse had photographed and texted him. Marcus had been on the phone for 2 hours with a contact in the state attorney's office. What Marcus had found was complicated and took Darnell 10 minutes to explain, and came down to this: the acceleration clause Fitch had invoked required the property to fail a specific maintenance standard codified in a rider to the original 1997 mortgage agreement. The rider required damage to be both structural and unaddressed for a minimum of 30 days before it could be cited as a default trigger. Fitch had cited storm damage that was 4 days old. The invocation was legally defective. The 72 hours was not valid. But Darnell said, and Jesse heard the weight of the word, but Marcus also found something else. Fitch's purchase of the loan from the bank had been structured through a transfer that may have violated the original mortgage's due on sale clause, which required the borrower's notification and consent for any transfer of the debt instrument. May had never been notified. She had never consented. That is significant, Darnell said. That might mean the transfer is void, which might mean Fitch does not actually own the loan. Jesse sat with that for a moment. Might, he said. Might, Darnell confirmed. Marcus says you need a real attorney, not a paralegal cousin doing favors. But he says you have something to work with if you can find the right person. He paused. And I told you about the 2 Harlem Bluff lawyers. Jesse leaned back in his chair. Right. Marcus knows somebody, and Corbin, Darnell said. Not scared of Fitch. Retired state court judge's daughter. Takes cases on contingency when she thinks they are worth it. He is going to text her tonight. Jesse closed his eyes for a second. All right, thank him for me. After he hung up, he sat at the kitchen table in the late afternoon light, the document from Fitch's lawyer in front of him, the folded card beside it, the catalog open to the inscription. The kitchen smelled like the soup May was making something with beans and ham that had been simmering since noon, and the smell was so specifically the smell of this house and this kitchen and everything Jesse had been trying to protect that it sat in his chest like a physical weight. He was 19 years old. He had $4,380 in a cash jar. He had a partial scholarship to a university he had not been able to afford to attend. He had a lawyer maybe coming and a phone call out to a man he had met 3 nights ago in a storm. He had 28 days that had become 72 hours that had now possibly become something else entirely depending on language in a 1997 mortgage rider that nobody had looked at in years. He had his father's workbench and his father's coffee mug and his father's catalog with 5 words written on the inside cover. He got up and went to call May for dinner. That night, Jesse could not sleep. He lay in the dark listening to the sounds the house made, the creak of the settling walls, the drip of the kitchen faucet. He had been meaning to fix the wind in the pine trees. At some point it began to rain again, lighter than the storm, a steady autumn rain that made the roof talk in its particular quiet language. He got up at 1 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table in the dark. He did not turn on a light. He just sat. He thought about his father on the side of an Alabama highway 7 years ago. A stranger's motorcycle, 4 hours in the July heat, no money taken. The same thing Jesse had done 4 nights ago without knowing he was repeating it. The same words. The same refusal, the same $20. He had not understood until this moment, sitting alone in the dark kitchen of the house he was trying to save, how much of himself was his father. Not the grief of losing him, not the absence, not the practical daily weight of carrying what Thomas had left. Something older and more structural than any of that. Something that had been built into him before he was old enough to know it was being built. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time with that. At 2:40 in the morning, his phone buzzed on the table. A text from a number he did not recognize. Corbin area code, Mr. Carver. My name is Sandra Locke. Darnell Voss's cousin gave me your information. I have reviewed the documents he sent me. I would like to speak with you Monday morning if you are available. I believe you have a defensible position. There is no charge for the initial consultation. Jesse read the text twice. He set the phone down. He looked at the dark window. The rain was still coming soft and steady. He thought about the 27 days remaining on the original notice, the 72 hours on the defective one, the loan transfer that might not have been legal, the morning that was still several hours away. He got up and went to bed. He slept. And in that sleep somewhere in the last hours before dawn, while the rain came down on Harlem Bluff and Route 7 ran empty and wet through the pines, something that had been wound very tight inside Jesse Carver loosened one half turn. Not because anything was solved, because for the first time in 27 days, he was not entirely alone with it. He woke at 5:15 to silence. The rain had stopped. The alarm went off, and he was already awake. He lay still for 30 seconds looking at the water stain on the ceiling, the crooked hand his father had meant to fix and never got to. Then he got up and put on his clothes and went to make coffee. He was standing at the sink finishing his first cup when he felt it. Low at first, a vibration more than a sound, something that lived in the floor and traveled up through the soles of his feet before his ears had found it. The windows caught it next to faint resonance in the glass, the kind that precedes the thing itself. Jesse set his mug on the counter. He walked to the kitchen window and looked out at Route 7. The road was empty, but the sound was getting louder. He walked through the bay to the front door and opened it. The cold dawn air came in sharp and clean after the rain. The sky above the ridgeline was just beginning to separate from dark into the first gray suggestion of morning. The sound was everywhere now, low and continuous, and building something between thunder and weather, and the particular voice of large machines in organized motion. Jesse stood in the doorway of his father's garage and watched the road. The first headlight appeared around the bend a half-mile north, then the second, then 10, then 30. Then Jesse lost count. They came in formation, two abreast, filling both lanes of Route 7 headlights, cutting through the pre-dawn mist in a river of light that went back farther than Jesse could see. Harleys and custom rigs, and vintage iron and touring machines, every configuration and every decade rolling south toward Harlem Bluff in the quiet, disciplined order of men who had done this before and knew what it meant. Jesse stood in the doorway and could not move. They filled the gravel lot first, then the side yard, then the shoulder of Route 7 in both directions, parking in precise lines, the sound of 200 engines dropping to idle, and then all at once going silent. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jesse Carver had ever heard. He stood in the doorway of Carver and Son Auto Repair in the gray light of a Kentucky morning and looked at 200 men in leather helmets, off hands folded, not moving, not speaking, facing the garage. 3 slow, heavy knocks on the frame of the open bay door. Jesse looked at the man standing on the threshold. Grant Holden, cleaned up, beard trimmed, leather cut pressed and straight. The same blue eyes carrying the same weight they always carried, and something else beneath it now. Something that had traveled 212 miles and back and was ready to be put down. Grant removed his sunglasses and held them in one hand. "Son," he said. His voice was quiet enough that only Jesse could hear it. "There is something I owe this family, and I have been carrying it for 6 years." He paused. "Would you ask your grandmother to come to the kitchen? There is a story she needs to hear first." Jesse looked at the 200 men standing in the gray morning light behind Grant Holden. He looked at the garage sign above the door, peeling and soft and hand-lettered and still standing. He looked at Grant. Then he turned and walked down the hall and knocked on May's door. "Mama," he said through the wood, "you need to come to the kitchen. There is someone here." May Carver came down the hall in her robe, her gray hair loose, her feet in the worn slippers she had owned for years. She stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw Grant Holden standing at her table. She looked at him, then passed him through the window at the gravel lot full of men and machines in the gray morning light, and her hand went to the doorframe, steadying herself against something large. Grant removed his hat with both hands. "Ma'am," his voice was low and even, "I am sorry for the hour. I am sorry for all of this arriving on your doorstep without warning." He paused. "My name is Grant Holden, and there is something I have owed your family for 6 years that I was not able to pay until 4 nights ago when I pulled into your driveway in the rain." May looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled her robe tighter and sat down at the kitchen table and folded her hands in front of her. "Sit down, Mr. Holden," she said, "and tell me what you mean by that." Grant sat. Jesse stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, not moving, not wanting to alter whatever was in the room by shifting it. Grant set his hat on the table beside him and looked at May directly the way a man looks at someone when he has decided that the only honest posture is a straight one. 7 years ago, he said, I was riding alone through the state of Alabama. Route 431, south of Huntsville, middle of July. My engine threw a rod. I pulled to the shoulder and I was stranded. He paused. It was a Sunday afternoon. The temperature was 102 degrees. I had ridden past 3 exits and the next town was 11 miles ahead. He folded his hands on the table. 7 vehicles passed me in 45 minutes. Not one of them slowed down. May's eyes were steady on his face. Then a truck pulled over, Grant said. An older model, Ford dark blue. A man got out in work clothes. He had a boy with him in the passenger seat, maybe 10 years old. He looked at my bike for about 30 seconds, and then he went to his truck bed and came back with a tool bag. Grant stopped. He worked on that engine for 4 hours, ma'am. 4 hours in a 102-degree Alabama sun. His boy handed him tools. They talked the whole time, the man and the boy, like it was the most natural thing in the world to stop for a stranger on the side of a highway and give him 4 hours of a Sunday. May's chin had lifted slightly. Her hands were still folded, but her knuckles had gone white. When he was finished, the bike ran it clean, Grant said. I tried to pay him. He would not take it. I asked him twice. He said his father taught him that when you find a man broken down on the road, you do not ask his price. He smiled when he said it the way a man smiles when he is saying something he believes all the way down. Grant's voice had gone rough at the edges. I asked his name. He told me. Thomas Carver, Harlan Bluff, Kentucky. May made a sound that was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something strikes a frequency that language cannot reach. Her hand came up and covered her mouth. Jesse had not moved from the doorway. He could not have moved. He was 10 years old in that memory. He was in the passenger seat of a dark blue Ford on a Sunday afternoon in Alabama, handing his father tools, the July heat coming through the windows, the smell of asphalt, his father working with the unhurried certainty of a man who knew what he was doing and why. He had been there. He had not known what he was part of until this moment in his grandmother's kitchen at 5 in the morning with 200 men standing silent in the yard. I went home, Grant said. A few weeks later, I sent him a catalog from our shop. Just something small to say I remembered. I wrote in it. He glanced at Jesse, then back to May. About a year after that, I tried to find Thomas. I had something I wanted to give him, something that meant more than money to the men I ride with. I made calls. He stopped. I found out through a contact that Thomas had passed. Paper mill accident. He had a wife and a son. May was crying. She was not making noise, but the tears were coming steadily, and she did not wipe them, just let them fall onto her folded hands. I rode to Harlan Bluff, Grant said. I found the cemetery. I stood at the back of the graves for a while. He looked at the table. I left before anyone could ask who I was. He swallowed. I have carried that unfinished business for 6 years, ma'am. 6 years of knowing there was a debt I could not locate the address on for anymore. He reached into the inside pocket of his cut and pulled out the old newspaper page folded and saw from years of handling. He unfolded it and laid it on the table facing May. The photograph, the 2 men at the industry event, arms around each other. Then he reached into the saddlebag at his feet and lifted out the Iron Road catalog, the one Jesse had returned to the workbench, which Grant's men had collected with the bag that morning. He set it gently on the table beside the newspaper page and opened it to the inside front cover. Thomas, stay safe. G.H. May looked at her husband's name in blue ink. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Her hand came down from her mouth and she pressed both palms flat on the table. He kept it, she said. Her voice was barely sound. 9 years on that workbench. She looked up at Grant. He told Jesse he never threw away anything he was grateful for. Grant closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. Jesse looked at the catalog. He thought about every Sunday morning for 6 years, the clean rag, the careful circuit around each object on the bench, the catalog in its corner. He had been preserving something he did not yet understand. He understood it now. May straightened in her chair. She wiped her face with both hands, a single deliberate motion, and when she looked up, she was May Carver, again fully composed. Mr. Holden, she said, what did you come here to do this morning? Grant reached under the table and brought up the leather portfolio. He set it between them and opened it without ceremony. The first document he laid in front of May was 2 pages official notarized. May read it slowly. Jessie watched her face change as she read a shift that moved through her like weather. This is the title to the property, Grant said. The house and the garage. The Iron Road Foundation paid the full balance of the outstanding debt and all associated penalties and back taxes yesterday afternoon, $197,412. The lien is released. The title is clear. May's hands pressed flat on the document. She did not speak. There is no mortgage, Grant. Grant said simply, there is no debt. This property belongs to you. May looked at Jessie. Jessie looked at her. The second document Grant laid on the table was thicker, tabbed with colored markers. This is a construction and restoration proposal, he said. The Iron Road Foundation will fund the full rebuild of the garage. 8 operational bays, hydraulic lifts, climate-controlled paint and bodywork suite parts inventory warehouse. Full tooling throughout. He paused. The estimated is $610,000. Construction to begin when you are ready at your pace on your schedule. May's hand went to her mouth again. Your husband's workbench. Grant said, his voice quieter now. His coffee mug. The carburetor and the vise. The catalog. Those stay exactly where they are under a proper display case at the entrance of the new shop. He looked at May steadily. The building will carry his name. Thomas Carver Memorial Restoration Garage. A brass plate at the door. His tools behind glass. Not a monument. A working place. The kind of place he would have built if he had had the chance. The kitchen was absolutely still. Outside the window, 200 men stood in the growing light without making a sound. May looked at the documents in front of her, and then she looked at the window, and then she looked at Jessie, and whatever she saw in his face made her cover her eyes with both hands and let the grief and relief come together the way they come when something you have been holding against pressure for years is suddenly allowed to release. Jessie crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and put his arms around his grandmother and held her. Grant sat quietly and let them have the moment. When May had steadied herself, she straightened and looked at Grant with the clear-eyed directness that was the most fundamental thing about her. This is too much, she said. Grant shook his head once. Ma'am, with all the respect I have, your husband paid this debt 7 years ago on the side of a road in Alabama. He gave me 4 hours and refused the money, and I have been trying to find the address to repay it ever since. He paused. Your grandson paid it again 4 nights ago, the same way, the same words, the same hands. He looked at May. The interest is ours to carry, not yours. May looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded one slow nod, the nod of a woman who has learned when to receive something gracefully. Grant turned to Jessie and picked up a third document from the portfolio. This is a scholarship offer, he said. He slid it across the table. Full ride to the University of Kentucky College of Engineering. Tuition, housing, books, and a monthly stipend for living expenses. 4 years. He paused. And a paid summer apprenticeship at Iron Road headquarters in Bowling Green every year you are enrolled, working with our master restoration team, the men who built the company from 2 bays and a borrowed lathe in 1981. Jessie looked at the document, his own name at the top, $340,000. You start when you are ready, son, and you come back to this garage every summer, knowing more than you knew when you left. Jessie sat down in the chair across from Grant. His legs had made the decision for him. He sat with the document in his hands and read his own name and read the university name and read the words full scholarship. And he thought about the manila envelope under his mattress and the $4,380 in the cash jar and the $11 an hour nights at the Sunoco and the letter he had not been able to open for 2 weeks because opening it fully would have meant allowing himself to want something he could not see how to reach. He set the document down. He looked at Grant. Sir, Jessie said, I need to ask you something. Grant nodded. The bike. 4 nights ago, you pulled into my lot specifically, not the chain shop down the road this time. You were already past the chain shop. You knew this address. Grant held his gaze. Yes. How long had you known we were here? A pause. 6 months. I hired someone to find Thomas Carver's family last spring. I had been thinking about the catalog about the debt for a long time, but your grandmother's situation had gotten urgent, and I could not find a clean way in. He stopped. And then the storm came, and I rode past your sign, and I pulled in. He looked at Jessie. The rest of it was real, son. The bike needed what you fixed. The anniversary ride was real. What happened in that bay was real. I did not engineer the 11 hours or the $20 or any of the rest of it. He paused. I only chose the driveway. Jesse sat with that. He thought about how he might feel learning this, whether it changed the shape of things. A man who had been carrying a debt for 6 years and had found a way to approach it. A man who had sat on a stool in a storm-lit garage and watched and written in a notebook and wept over a gas tank and said, "What you did tonight will not be forgotten." None of that was manufactured. That had been real. Jesse had been in the room for all of it, and he knew the difference between performance and truth. He nodded slowly. Grant reached into the portfolio one final time. He lifted out a small wooden box, dark-stained, the kind used for things that are kept rather than displayed. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside, on a fold of dark felt, lay a cloth patch, 3 inches wide, heavy gold embroidery on black backing, 3 words stitched across the center. Brother of the Road. Grant picked it up with both hands. This patch, he said, is given by the Iron Road Brotherhood. Not often, sometimes years go by without one being awarded. It goes to a person outside the club who has preserved the honor of a brother when they had no obligation to do so. He looked at Jesse. You kept my honor 4 nights ago. You could have taken the $500 and no one would have faulted you. You had every reason to take it. He paused. You gave it back in your father's words. He stood up. Jesse stood because Grant was standing and it was the right thing to do. Grant crossed the kitchen and stood in front of Jesse, and with both hands, carefully the way you handle something that means something, he pinned the patch to the front of Jesse's work shirt. He stepped back and looked at him. You are family now, Grant said quietly. Every road we ride, you ride with us. Every door we can open, consider it open. Wherever you go for the rest of your life, you do not go without brothers at your back. Jesse stood in his father's kitchen with a gold-stitched patch on his chest and could not find a single word anywhere in him. May put her hand on her grandson's arm and held it there. Now, Grant said, turning toward the window and the 200 men waiting in the morning light, there is one more piece of business. He walked to the front door and stepped onto the porch. His voice carried without effort across the gravel lot. Brothers, caps off for Thomas Carver. 200 men in leather removed their caps and bowed their heads in the early morning light of Harlan Bluff, Kentucky. The pines along Route 7 were still. The mist was lifting off the ridge. The sun was coming up behind the tree line in the long, flat bands of copper and gold. Jesse stood on the porch beside his grandmother and looked at it. May leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They stood there in their bare feet in the cool morning air, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing that words could add to what was already there. What happened to Douglas Fitch did not happen loudly. There were no confrontations in the gravel lot. There was no moment where a large man in leather put his hand on Fitch's shoulder and explained things to him in terms he could not misunderstand. That was not how Grant Holden had built a company for 40 years, and it was not how he settled debts. What happened was this. 2 members of the Iron Road Brotherhood, it turned out, were not mechanics. One was a retired federal investigator who had spent 20 years in financial crimes enforcement before taking his pension and spending his weekends on a custom Softail. The other was a corporate attorney from Nashville who handled transactions in the 9-figure range on a regular basis and who had, over the years, developed a particular distaste for men who use small market legal instruments to extract property from families who could not afford to defend themselves. They spent 3 days looking at the documents. What they found was not complicated once someone who knew where to look was looking. The transfer of the Carver mortgage from Harlan County Community Bank to Douglas Fitch Properties, LLC, had been structured in a way that bypassed the notification requirement written into the original 1997 loan agreement. May Carver had never been informed that her lender had changed. She had never consented. Under Kentucky mortgage law, the transfer was defective and likely void. More significantly, the acceleration clause Fitch had invoked required the property to fail a specific maintenance standard for a minimum of 30 days before it could be cited as a default trigger. Fitch had cited storm damage that was 4 days old. The invocation was legally defective. He had no standing. There was also a question about the chain of communications between Fitch and a loan officer at Harlan County Community Bank regarding the terms of the sale communications that the bank had not disclosed when the transaction closed. The retired investigator wrote a 12-page memo. The Nashville attorney made 4 phone calls over 2 days. 2 to the bank's parent institution, 1 to the Kentucky Department of Financial Institutions, and 1 to a contact at the state attorney's office who had been looking for a reason to open a file on certain property acquisition patterns in Harlan County for some time. Douglas Fitch did not go to prison, not immediately and not as a direct result of any single thing the Iron Road Brotherhood did. What happened instead was that his business license came under review. His relationship with Harlan County Community Bank came under scrutiny. 2 of the LLCs through which he had been purchasing Route 7 properties became subjects of a state inquiry into whether the acquisitions had been properly disclosed to surrounding property owners as required under commercial development transparency statutes. His lawyer advised him to pause all active proceedings. 3 weeks after Grant Holden's visit to Harlan Bluff, Douglas Fitch quietly withdrew the foreclosure filing. 6 weeks after that, he sold 3 of his Route 7 parcels at a loss to a regional buyer who had no connection to anyone involved. By winter, he had relocated his primary office to Lexington and was no longer a visible presence in Harlan Bluff. He did not say goodbye to anyone. He did not explain anything. He simply was there and then was not there, the way men like that disappear when the ground shifts under them, without announcement and without apology. The attorney from Nashville called Jesse to let him know. He kept it brief. Son, the document Fitch filed is withdrawn. The lien release your title shows is clean and will not be challenged. He paused. I would suggest keeping good records going forward, but I do not anticipate further issues from that quarter. Have a good evening. Jesse thanked him and hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a while. May was in the next room. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the particular warm wood smell of the house in autumn. Jesse could hear the television, the familiar rhythm of it, the ordinary sound of an ordinary evening in a house that was now theirs without condition. He got up and went to tell May the news. Jesse left for the University of Kentucky in the 3rd week of August. May packed him enough food for 4 men. He loaded his truck, which was his father's truck, the same dark blue Ford maintained by Jesse's own hands, for 6 years. He drove the length of the driveway and stopped and looked back at the house and the garage and his grandmother standing on the porch in the morning light. She raised one hand, he raised his back. Then he drove. He cried for the first 30 minutes on the highway, not from sadness, or not only from sadness, but from the way large feelings need a release valve, and the release valve is sometimes a long empty road. By the time he reached the interstate, the road was opening up ahead of him, and he turned on the radio. His first semester GPA was 3.91. His introduction to materials science professor, a deliberate woman from Western Virginia named Dr. Patricia Marsh, asked him 3 weeks in how he had learned to think about metal the way he thought about it. Jesse told her his father had been a mechanic. She said that explained it and moved on, but she did not forget it, and by spring, she had invited him into a research project on fatigue analysis in high-stress cast components. Jesse understood how metal behaved when it was asked to do things, not just how the equations said it should behave, how it actually behaved. First summer in Bowling Green, Iron Road headquarters. He had expected it to be impressive, and it was, but what surprised him was that it was also a working place in the way his father's garage had been a working place full of noise and grease and the specific concentration of men who cared about what they were building. The master builders, men in their 50s and 60s with forearms like rope and eyes that evaluated every component before they touched it, worked him 12 hours a day and taught him things that were not in any textbook he had encountered. One of them, an old man named Lou Briggs, who had been with Iron Road since the 2nd year of operation, watched Jesse work for 3 days without saying much. On the 4th day, Lou set down his own tools and stood beside Jesse at the bench. Son, Lou said, "Where did you learn to feel for tolerance like that?" Jesse looked at the part in his hands. "My dad." Lou nodded. He picked his tools back up. "That is the only place you can learn it," he said. Jesse built his first complete ground-up custom at the end of his 2nd summer. A tribute built a panhead because he could not have built anything else for a first one. He worked on it for 11 weeks. He called it the Thomas. Iron Road auctioned it at their fall charity event. It sold for $51,000. Every dollar went to the Thomas Carver Memorial Trust, which Grant had established, and which Jesse now sat on the board of the youngest board member in the organization's history, charged with identifying young men and women in rural communities who wanted to study engineering and trades and could not see how to get there from where they were. The first 3 recipients were announced the following spring: 2 young men from eastern Kentucky, 1 young woman from rural West Virginia. All 3 were the first in their families to attend university. Jesse read their application essays at the kitchen table in Harlem Bluff over Thanksgiving break and called Grant afterward. Grant answered on the second ring. "You read them," Grant said. "Yeah, good kids." "Yeah," Jesse paused. "This is what it is supposed to be, is it not?" "That is exactly what it is supposed to be," Grant said. May ran the front office of the Thomas Carver Memorial Restoration Garage from the first day construction was complete. She hired 2 mechanics, one of whom was a young man from 2 ridges over, who had been working at the chain shop and who came to May with his resume and a slightly embarrassed expression. May read the resume and hired him on the spot. What mattered was whether he could do the work. He could do the work. Darnell Voss transferred from Louisville and came home as the shop's first junior apprentice. Grant presented him with an engraved toolbox at a small ceremony that May catered with biscuits and a ham that had been slow cooking since the day before. Darnell held the toolbox and looked at May and then at Jesse and could not quite get the words out. May took the toolbox from him, set it on the bench, and hugged him the way she hugged people completely and without reservation. The sign above the new shop door was hand-lettered by a man from Harlem Bluff who had lettered signs for 40 years and who charged nothing for this particular job. He said Thomas Carver had fixed his transmission for cost when he could not afford the full price, and he had been waiting for a chance to square it. The bench inside the entrance was original Thomas Carver's actual bench, cleaned and sealed and mounted on a low stone platform under museum-quality glass. The coffee mug, the carburetor in the vise, the left-handed work glove. The catalog opened to the inside front cover, the 5 words in blue ink facing out. Thomas, stay safe. GH, the brass plate below read, "This bench is where it started." Twice. 1 year after the morning Grant Holden had knocked on the bay door, Jesse was home from university for the summer, working his last weeks before heading to Bowling Green for his 3rd apprenticeship. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and a front was coming down from the north, a steady autumn rain that had been building since afternoon. Jesse was alone in his garage finishing the last bay of the night. He had been there since 4 doing the quiet maintenance work that garages need after the customer hours are done, organizing, checking, inventory, cleaning the lifts. The kind of work that does not require thinking and therefore allows it. At 9:45, he heard a knock at the side door. He opened it. A young man stood in the rain, mid-20s, wet through one hand on the handlebar of a stalled motorcycle, a small commuter bike. Nothing special. His expression was the expression of someone who is embarrassed about something they cannot help. "I saw the light on," the young man said. "I am sorry to bother you. My bike stopped about a mile up the road. I walked it here." He paused. "Somebody at the gas station said this shop helps people who cannot pay. I just need to get home." Jesse looked at the bike. He looked at the young man's face. "Come on in out of that rain," he said. "I will take a look." He brought the bike into the bay, fouled fuel line and a spark plug that had given up its last good firing. 14 minutes of work. He did it in silence, the same deep, clean focus his father had worked in, the kind that is its own form of presence. When he was finished, he handed the young man the key. The young man reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill, creased and soft, the kind of bill that has been in a pocket for a long time. He held it out. "That is all I have. I know it is not enough." Jesse looked at the 20. He thought about a different 20 on a different bench in a different storm. "Put it away," he said. The young man started to object, and Jesse shook his head. "Listen to me," Jesse said. His voice was quiet and even. "One day, not today, not tomorrow maybe, but one day you are going to be somewhere, and somebody near you is going to need something, and you are going to be the only one who can help." He paused. "When that day comes, you help them. You do not ask what it is worth. You do not ask if they can pay. You just help." He looked at the young man steadily. "That is the only payment I take." The young man stood in the bay doorway with the rain behind him and looked at Jesse for a moment with an expression that was finding its way to something. Then he nodded. He put the 20 back in his jacket. He got on his bike and rode out into the rain and Jesse watched the taillight disappear up Route 7. Jesse stood in the doorway for a while after the sound was gone. Then he turned and walked to the entrance of the garage and stood in front of his father's bench under the glass. The coffee mug, the carburetor, the catalog with the inscription "Facing Out." He put his hand flat on the glass. "I see it now, Daddy," he said. "To the bench, to the tools, to the particular quality of presence that a place holds when someone has worked in it and loved it for long enough." Then he heard it, low first in the floor and the soles of his feet. A single engine, big and unhurried, coming up Route 7 from the south. Jesse turned and walked to the bay door. A touring rig rolled to a stop on the shoulder of the road, its headlight finding Jesse in the doorway. The window came down, Grant holding gray-bearded easy in the saddle on his way somewhere north. "You good son." Jesse looked at his father's sign above the door, at the pine trees along the road black against the dark sky, at the rain still coming down in the headlight. "I am good, Uncle Grant." Grant looked at Jesse in the bay doorway for a moment. Then he raised one hand. Jesse raised his back. Grant rolled on north, and the sound of his engine moved up the road and faded into the dark, and then there was nothing left of it but the rain and the quiet and the particular stillness of a Thursday night in Harlem Bluff, Kentucky, where a 19-year-old boy had once stood in a doorway and watched a stranger disappear into a storm, not knowing yet that the stranger was carrying something that belonged to his family, not knowing yet what his father had set in motion on a Sunday afternoon 7 years before on the side of an Alabama highway. He knew now. Jesse Carver turned off the bay light and walked through the garage, trailing one hand along his father's workbench in the dark, feeling the familiar texture of the wood beneath his fingers. He went through the kitchen door. The house was warm and quiet. May was asleep. He locked up. He went to bed.